sure you'll agree when I say it's funny how timing, opportunity and sheer luck collide, providing one with the chance to take your life in a different direction. This often comes about when we change jobs, start work for a different company, branch out on our own, or have a crack in a totally new career. The latter, a totally new path, was what happened to me when I answered an advert in the Situations Vacant section of the Christchurch Press in 1980. There is also a lot to be said about going on the front foot and taking the initiative to upskill and knock on doors. When opportunity came knocking in 1877, initiative is one quality the 41-year-old Irishman Tom Long had going for him. That and confidence, little else, not even a permanent roof over his head. Unpaid bar tabs and boarding house tenancies aplenty all across the lower North Island and Upper South. This angry drunk took his chance, his time to be in the sun, under a set of horrific circumstances. For that we need to go to the Marlborough Sounds at the top of the South Island. William Woodgate had been living with his brother Robert on his remote farm, and when Robert died he shifted from living in the labourers' quarters into the main house after beginning a relationship with his brother's widow. The new family unit also consisted of 2 children, his 2 nieces, Susan and Elizabeth. Then when his brother's wife died, Susan became the mother. Got nice and comfy with the new sleeping arrangements. That's to put it rather euphemistically. Before you go down the line, this was just the inevitable result of a remote rural setting back in the 1870s when the gene pool was way smaller and there wasn't even a radio to listen to. I'd probably need to tell you, William Woodgate was 48 and his niece Susan Woodgate, well, she was 13, knocked up by 14. The pair kept their relationship and the pregnancy secret. When the child was born, William decided he would get rid of the evidence and smothered the baby, which was too much for Susan, and she reported everything to the police. He was tried and sentenced to hang. Not a popular sentence for the locals, who had some sympathy for the bloke, wanted him imprisoned, not executed by the state. 48 hours before the execution was due to take place at Petone prison, the man from outside the district lined up to do the deed got wind this wasn't going to make him popular in these parts. He got cold feet, scarpered on the ferry back to Wellington. The police and court were left scrambling to find a replacement. This is where the itinerant drunkard John Long, who was pottering around town, seized his chance. He went to the police station and presented his credentials. Time in the British Army up on the Indian frontier, where he boasted, "I've slung 'em up by the dozen." Went on to tell court officials this wouldn't be by any stretch the first time he'd sent a man to his maker. During his time on the Australian goldfields, he'd deputised as an executioner in much the same circumstances. Much of his verbal CV was BS. He would later say he was in the British Navy, and that's where he got his anchor tattoo on his forearm. Still, beggars can't be choosers. In terms of job applications, he was the only one. In essence, the job was his by default. Proof would be in the pudding. Woodgate's last day was Sparrowfart on the morning of January the 27th, 1877. He said his last words. A succinct conciliatory statement towards his captors was given to the witnesses at the bottom of the scaffold. Shortly after he was read the last rites.
"I thank you very much indeed, and I die in peace with all men. I have nothing more to say."
Led up the steps to the wooden platform in restraint. He had now just 90 seconds to live. Tom Long was waiting. In his element, placed the noose around Woodgate's neck, and then rather brazenly and bizarrely said,
"Goodbye, old fellow. I wish you a pleasant journey. You're only going to be a few days before us, perhaps. I might follow you tomorrow, or the next day myself."
That wasn't in the script, and then there was more unwanted pantomime to come.
"Well, how do you feel? Is it comfortable, or is it too tight?"
Woodgate replied, "No."
"Well, goodbye. I wish you a pleasant journey."
Then a split second later, he kicked the bolt on the trapdoor, sending Woodgate to his fate. Death was all but instantaneous. Long was proud of his work. Still in the spotlight, the body still warm, hanging lifelessly, the nonchalant Long addressed the witnesses.
Well, gentlemen, are you satisfied?
Aghast at the question, the dumbfounded crowd said nothing. The gallows now his stage, he repeated his question, come boast.
Are you satisfied that I've done my duty?
The official doctor now stepped up to save further theatrics, agreed the condemned had died in a humane and quick fashion. As the body was taken down, Long descended and began asking when he was going to be paid. This was the first execution undertaken by Tom Long. Likely he was drunk at the time. That wasn't unusual, by the way, for executioners to employ alcohol to numb the proceedings. In Long's case, though, it would be hard to tell. He was habitually pissed, far from the last time he'd put a noose around a man's neck, as well as the only woman to be executed in New Zealand, Minnie Dean. In total, we know there were 5 positive, another 6 likely. The doubt as to the exact total. At the time, there were some crimes that were so high profile, front page news for weeks on end, the police and courts wanted to temper the public's demand for blood, lower the temperature in the room, so to speak. Part of this lowering of the tone meant the name of the executions will sometimes be hidden. They would be discreetly housed away and told to keep a low profile in the days leading up to the execution, leave town immediately. That's why, under the veil of priest secrecy and discretion, we'll never know Long's exact total. We do know he vouched to hangings that clearly weren't his. The last 100%er was in 1905, 28 years after Petone, aged 69, Invercargill in the south, and to Auckland in the north. The bombastic publicity seeking Long was known by name and reputation up and down the land, earning the nickname the Executioner and Long Tom, a reference to his neck stretching. An itinerant loner, lived from manual job to manual job, supplementing his lifestyle by inhabiting hotels at night and giving blow-by-blow recounts of his exploits to anyone who would pay for his next round. When boozing funds were low, he claimed he had garnished macabre mementos from the victims. Woodgate's cap, he sold more than one pair of Minnie Dean's shoes as well, repeating the same banter the next night until the locals got sick of him. The other people that tired of his antics were the police. 14th August 1895, article Wairarapa Daily Times, location of incident, East Coast, middle of the South Island. Headline reads, Hangman's spree. This morning, Tom Long, the hangman, was convicted of drunkenness and discharged on condition that he left the town by the next train. He was taken off the express last night, very drunk. 2 days earlier, 500 kilometres south Invercargill, and specifically the jail there, Tom Long was the man who had the onerous job of executing Wilhelmina Dean. That was one that really divided the country. Controversial, not because she was a woman. Long was secreted into town. By now, the authorities knew full well the very first thing he was liable to do was go straight from the train to the closest pub, get pissed and blabber about the impending execution, unfold previous ongoings to anyone who wanted to buy him a whiskey. He was placed under starter's orders, strict instructions not to leave the boarding house and not to drink. The morning of the execution of the 50-year-old baby killer, for once, staunch game day fortitude failed him. He folded under the enormity of what he was shortly charged to do, sat down, went on strike. With just 90 minutes to go, frantic negotiations took place. A compromise was reached, and they would allow him to get drunk. One small problem: a jail isn't top of the list of places one finds hard liquor. All they could rouse up in short notice was a bottle of brandy from the infirmary. Long Tom, sculled the equivalent of a 10-ounce, was back in the groove, announcing,
"Now, if you like, I will hang 20 women."
Minnie Dean's last words were,
"Oh God, don't let me suffer."
The day after, the tactless Long told the reporter,
"Not everyone can make £25 for 5 minutes' work."
Charmed, I'm sure. Then, after getting booted out of Ashburton, having made it back to the North Island, he encountered a rugby team travelling back from a game, went into graphic detail about Dean's death. Not heeding the warning to keep his trap shut, he carried on and ended up having to be rescued by the conductor after some of the players had used his belt to string him up from a baggage hat rack. Now, let's get back to some more of his drunken shenanigans. May 1886, Masterton News, location of incident, Masterton, Lower North Island. Headline, ex-hangman in trouble. Tom Long, the ex-hangman, received a fortnight in the jail for rubbing noses with a comrade soldier, whom he had fought in Taranaki. Long had a great scene with the police, who he accused of persecution. April 1897, Otago Times. Location of incident, Dunedin, east coast of the South Island. At the police court today, Tom Long, the hangman, was fined £3 and sentenced to 14 days hard labour on 3 charges of drunkenness, resisting police and obscene language. That incident in Dunedin was a week after he had executed Stephen Bruchy in Wellington, a real name Etienne Bruchy, a Frenchman who arrived in New Zealand in the mid-1870s, occupied his time as a bricklayer and petty thief, would claim a stunning inability to speak English when it suited him. The cuffs were around his wrists. Bruchy's life was a catalogue of misadventure, which I will highlight headline style. Done time for burglary, charged with assault after kicking a bloke in the balls, got married, sued for substandard work, stole funds from the Catholic Church, stole a horse, fled the country back to France, where he was immediately arrested for draft dodging, punished by being sent to a French military outpost in Africa, came back to New Zealand in 1890, where in 1897, after casing the joint, decided to burgle the Petone Wellington shop of the Smiths. Same evening, Mr. Smith caught him in the act, and Mrs. Smith joined in the fray. Bruchy had come armed with a knife, hardly necessary since he was 30 years younger than the couple. Both Mr. and Mrs. Smith were stabbed to death in the bungled burglary, adding to the public indignation. In the furore, saw Bruchy flee the scene, empty-handed. The pressure was now on to find the killer. They thought they had their man, when a witness came forward to say he had seen this person in and around the shop. That witness was none other than Bruchy. Then, as the case went on, the circumstantial evidence began pointing more his way. The French bloke didn't exactly insist himself here. Now a murder suspect, he went and got married for the second time. Slightly messy since he left the country in a cloud to go back to France, and he never bothered to get divorced from wife number 1. And he also then sold the same horse and cart to 2 buyers. Was jailed for bigamy and false pretences even before he was charged for murder, and proven guilty. Because he was considered a foreigner in a land of immigrants, the savage and senseless nature of the couple's death, the public wanted his guts for garters. Mr. Long, he now faced competition to stretch Bruchy's neck. Men came forward offering to do it for nothing, donate the standard fee, £25 to charity. Long, well, he was still chosen to do the deed. In the preceding minutes after the hanging, he gave his standard boastful, unwarranted post-mortem speech.
"Well, gentlemen, did I do a good job? Are you satisfied?"
Now let's get back again to yet more of Long's extracurricular booze-ridden activities. May 1898, Woodville Examiner, location of incident, Wanganui, West Coast, North Island. Tom Long, the hangman, received his usual 3 months at Wanganui on Wednesday up for being drunk and disorderly. The Wanganui court report is a bit of a hoot. Good insight into Tom Long's antics under the influence. Constable Howe stated that about 7 o'clock last evening he heard a great noise from inside the Rutland Hotel, and on going inside saw Long in a dishevelled and excited state. He threatened to kill the first policeman who touched them. Witnesses were sent to the police station for support. Constable Sherman and Young came to the witness's assistance and they asked the defendant to come quietly. Long replied, "I will not go, I'll make a fight for it." Then he placed himself in a fighting attitude, but before he could strike a blow, he was laid on the broad of his back, handcuffed and legs tied by Constable Young. He was then taken in a cab to the police station. On the journey, the defendant used vile language, and he threatened to shoot the police when he got out. Despite racking up misdemeanor after misdemeanor, some historians have suggested he appeared in court over 100 times. I don't believe it was that many, however it was clearly a lot. Onerous he may be, Long's proficiency dispatching those sentenced to death meant his services were in demand. Last client was James Ellis, also known as John Mackenzie. Previously, Ellis raped a 12-year-old in 1882 and had been released on good behaviour. Part of that sentence, something worth a look at reintroducing if you ask me, he got 2 lots of flogging, 30 lashes on the way in, 30 lashes on the way out of the clink as a little reminder not to come back. Now a bushman cutting shrub, he came into conflict with his boss. One day, when his employer wasn't looking, he shot him in the back and went on the run, living rough for 10 months before the police descended onto his hut in the Ruahines. That's a forest, by the way. Still in possession of the murder weapon. The jury recommended mercy, a life sentence. That appeal for clemency failed. Tom Long, now working in much the same field, was soon on the train 200 kilometres south from Wanganui, destination Wellington, specifically the jail. The time after the failed appeal decision and Ellis's execution day being just 7 days. The standard terms were £2 up front and 23 on completion of the job. Officialdom knowing full well if he got the lot up front, he'd likely get blottoed. Wearing his standard garb, blue dungarees and a large leather waist belt, Long performed his duty. Got speaking to reporters, where he went on a long rant. Firstly complained about the going rate, how it had remained at £25, when things these days cost a lot more than when he started. He told readers that when he was in India he would string up 4 or 5 coolies in a single morning, and he'd get £5 each. In essence, New Zealand wasn't compensating him on the global scale. Went on to say he was going to start the New Zealand Hangman's Union to stand up for hangman's rights. And clearly that didn't get off the ground, or even below it. Then went on to say it was probably time to get a new rope. The one he'd been using today was the one he'd used on Brucey all those years ago. In an uncharacteristic humanistic remark, he paid tribute to James Ellis's stoic attitude facing death, complimenting him as being
the pluckiest I've handled.
Time was now up on his career. A younger, less prickly replacement came forward, although he turned out to be a bugger for the bottle as well. In the 1930s it became a prerequisite for executioners to be a teetotaler. Tom went back up north to Wanganui, working odd jobs as a bushman, making himself a right royal pain in the butt at any pub that would have him. He died in a workplace accident on the 15th of December 1908, cutting down a tree branch which fell on him and crushed him. The headlines read,
Exit Tom Long.
Likely age 72, or perhaps even 82. No one really knows his true age. Like the rest of his life, fiction and non-fiction mixed seamlessly. We only have his word for some things, which, to be as conciliatory as possible, wasn't all that reliable. Thanks for making it this far into the podcast. I hope to see you next time here on Weird NZ. If you are feeling generous today, then shouting me a coffee would be rather nice. Bye for now.